What's up, everybody? We are back for some more MMA DFS picks, lineup advice, FanDuel, DraftKings, best bets, DFS strategies, lineup construction tips, picks, everything you need to crush UFC Orlando on Saturday night. Kevin Holland, Stephen Thompson. Very interesting card, 14 fights. We're going to break it down here for you. Welcome. I'm Brian Jester, co-founder at Occupy Fantasy, joined by Jake the Snake, owner of MMADFS.com. Jake, hope you enjoyed the week off. We are back now. We get 3 in a row, and then we get a nice little Christmas break.
Yeah, man, we got a week off, and they just pushed all the fights onto this one card. We did get one canceled earlier, but it was almost a 15-fight card, down to 14 now. But it looks like a good one, man. Honestly, like this is like borderline pay-per-view quality. We got some good fights here.
I agree. So let's just jump into it. For those of you that are new, welcome. What we normally do is we break down the main event, what it means for betting and DFS. This week, that is Kevin Holland and Stephen Thompson. We talk about any newcomers making their octagon debut. We do have one on the card. We play good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. To give you some context to UFC stats for fighters that have less than 4 UFC fights under their belt. We have quite a few on this card, so we'll get through that. Prize Picks, you see the promo code here on screen. We'll give you our favorite Prize Picks play, a fight that you have to target in DFS. Whoever wins likely scores very well. And then we'll give our stream parlay, 2 of our favorite bets of the week. I mean, what more could you want? We jam it all into 15, 20 minutes, so stick around. Jake, let's get into it, though. Kevin Holland, Stephen Thompson, very intriguing matchup here. Give me the rundown, how you think this fight plays out, but most importantly, what does it mean for DFS?
Yeah, I mean, we got like a pure striking battle. You know, we got Kevin Holland coming in. He just had to fight Chimaev, got absolutely torched immediately taken down as he went for the high five, hand, whatever slap to start the fight. Afterwards, he was like, yeah, I made a bunch of money. I'm going to retire now. It's like, wait, what? So he retired for like a month, and then he took this fight. Neither guy wanted to fight a grappler, so they got exactly what they wanted. Pure striking battle. Holland's still young. He's 30 years old. Wonder Boy's 39, about to turn 40. So, you know, obviously there's a few concerns on Thompson's side of things about his age. He's coming off 2 grappling-heavy decision losses. But yeah, I mean, we're just expecting this to be basically a kickboxing match. You know, Thompson's a pure karate style striker, hasn't landed a takedown in his last 11 fights. Holland, I believe he only has 1 takedown attempt in his last 5 matches. They didn't land. So really, we're just expecting us to stay on the feet. Neither guy lands a ton of volume. Holland's only averaging 3.85 significant strikes landed per minute. Thompson's just a hair above that at 3.9. That makes it a little bit tougher to have one of those high-scoring, volume-driven decisions that we see sometimes in a 5-round fight. So my projections have this a little bit lower in terms of the scoring potential if we don't see a finish. You know, looking at Thompson, he's really not much of a finisher. 0 early wins in his last 10 fights dating back to 2016, whereas Holland actually is a finisher. Last 4 wins all came in the first 2 rounds. So he's got some finishing potential, but Thompson rarely ever gets finished. So it's one of those matchups where, you know, more likely than not, it's probably going to go deep in the fight. If we do get a finish and it comes in the middle rounds, there's a decent chance it doesn't really score that well. You know, it'd probably be like a Holland round 3 KO or something, score like 95 to 100 DraftKings points, not put up a huge score. If it does go the distance, I don't think we're going to have a monster score. I think Thompson would have a better chance to end up in the winning lineup based on his price. I think it would be a little bit harder for Holland to get there, but he's not crazy priced on DraftKings, so I think there at least it might be a little bit easier. I think both guys are playable, but I don't think you have to have one in high risk lineups. I still think the floor is high enough on both fighters that I think you still stack it in low risk though. I think it makes sense just to get the combined floor. You know, you lock in the points, and then it makes it a lot easier to build out the rest of your low risk lineups on DraftKings.
Totally agree with that assessment. Really well said, Jake. If you had to fade one fighter, let's say you're making 5 lineups, right? Or let's say you're making 20 lineups. Let's make this a little more difficult. You're making 20 lineups for DraftKings. If you had to leave one of them out of your player pool, which one is it?
Man, that's tricky because I think Holland wins, but I think Thompson's more likely to end up in the winner if he wins. So I would almost be like, you know what, let's just fade both of them. And let's just hope that Holland gets a round 3 KO, scores like 90 points, and gets priced out of the winning lineup. But yeah, man, it's tricky because I can see arguments for either guys. I mean, Thompson based on the price and Holland based on the likelihood of winning and the higher chance of getting a finish. But Yeah, that's a. I'm gonna take a cop out. That's a tough one to answer.
That's fair. And with 14 fights, it does make it a little more difficult for it to get into the winning and optimal lineup. And yeah, it's interesting. You're gonna have to make tough decisions regardless on the slate when you have this many fights. So why not make the tough decisions on some of the more popular fighters? That's how I always feel about it. So all right, Jake, let's move on. Let's talk about the newcomer on the card, Francis Marshall. Just 6 UFC fights under his belt. He's actually the favorite in this matchup against Rojo. What have you seen on tape from Francis Marshall? What can we expect from him in DFS?
Yeah, just 6 pro fights to his name. He's got 4 submissions, 2 decisions. I know you brought it up as soon as you saw him earlier in the week. This guy, like his third most recent fight was against a guy that's lost like 14 fights in a row. So obviously he hasn't been facing the toughest competition. Still 23 years old. He wrestled in high school, but I think he's still pretty green. Like he's physically strong. He has a lot of potential, but I feel like he's a little bit stationary in the striking exchanges. He's kind of there to be hit. But he does have power and he lands takedowns. Like you look at his contender series fight, it would have scored 122 points on both DraftKings and FanDuel, coincidentally, and that was a decision. So I mean, he's got great scoring potential. I just wonder about if the lights are going to be too bright for him. Coming in front of a crowd, so few fights to his name, so young. He's fighting a guy with a lot of experience, even though Rojo hasn't won a fight yet in the UFC. He's been fighting for a lot longer. So it's hard to know how Marshall will react to that, but I think he's got a high ceiling, and I think he's sort of an interesting prospect. He just needs to kind of work on a few things, clean a few things up. But yeah, I think he's somewhat interesting.
It's funny to me. It feels like we get at least once a month or once every couple months these cookie cutter, stocky wrestlers who come in, all kind of the same outlook, right? High ceilings. Don't know much about them. Not a ton of data and not a ton of fights under the belt. And I'm just grouping them in that category. And to me, like you said, his competition far far below than what Rojo has faced throughout his career, even outside of the UFC. So, as I told you earlier in the week, we were trying to find some tape on one of his most recent fights, and it was like just completely wasted my time because he fought a guy who just didn't know how to defend the takedown and just laid on him for 15 minutes.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that.
All right, so moving on. Good fighter, bad fighter, good matchup, bad matchup. Fighters that have less than 4 UFC fights under their belt. Give some more context to their stats. Can't go through every single fight here in these videos. Jake does a great job at MMADFS.com if you want that kind of information. But just give you some context to some of these fighters. So Jake, starting from the earliest fight on the card, which is now important because of the late swap feature on DraftKings. We have 2 fighters with less than 2 fights under, or less than 4 fights under their belt. We have Yasmin and we have Nunez. Good fighters, good matchup, bad matchup for each.
Yeah, I think Yasmin's a really good fighter. I think she's pretty well rounded, really good striking. She has some grappling when she needs it, good cardio. She showed she can go 300 rounds in her last fight. So I think she's definitely a good fighter. And on Nunez's side, she's like a Muay Thai striker. She's a good striker, but terrible cardio, absolutely horrendous grappling. So I'm going to have to call her a bad fighter, even though she has good striking. So because of that, I think it's a good matchup for Yasmin. I think it's a bad matchup for Nunez.
Honestly, you got to say it's the best matchup Nunez has had so far, probably, right? As far as someone who's probably not going to take her down, which I don't know how much it's saying because she's still a plus 250 underdog.
I mean, I guess, but like Sam Hughes hadn't wrestled any going into that Nunez fight. I know Hughes like was working on that was like her transition period to add more wrestling, but going into that, I
True,
would
true,
say
true.
Sam Hughes was a much better matchup than Yasmin. But yeah, I mean, this we'll see. I mean, Yasmin could be looking to take her down. I don't know. Maybe she won't, but I wouldn't be surprised if she looked to take her down. If you look earlier in Yasmin's career, she was shooting for takedowns and landing them. She was kind of getting reversed easily, but she was actually shooting. She hasn't been doing that as much lately, but it's at least there if she wants it. And Nunez is so bad on the mat. I wouldn't be surprised if she did look for some takedowns here.
For sure. And yeah, my exposures in that Hughes fight would also reflect the fact that I thought it was an easier fight, an easier matchup for Nunez. So, all right, moving on down. We talked about Marshall already. He is fighting Rojo, who does have 2 losses in the UFC. Pretty good competition, though, right? Again, we're not even talking about outside the UFC. Like, this dude's fought Charles Jourdain and Kyler Phillips, so, right? Like, by far better than anyone than Francis has fought. But give me the take on Rojo.
Yeah, man. I was watching an interview with Rob the other day, and he was basically talking about like, yeah, I came in, I'll just take any fight, man. Whoever my coach tells me to fight, whatever weight class, that's what I'm doing. He's like, yeah, I'm not doing that anymore. I moved to Vegas. I got rid of everyone. I switched to Glory MMA. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
Tough move, buddy.
Which, by the way, if you see
But yeah,
if you've been following the news, he is still allowed to fight tomorrow because of the short notice of all the James Krause stuff going on. So don't let that concern you if you're into knowing who's fighting where. Rojo is able to fight tomorrow, Saturday.
right. We just don't know who's going to be in his corner, but I'm sure he'll have someone and he'll be all right. But I mean, I think he looks healthier and looks better at 145. He's been bouncing around weight classes, which I think that's just really hard to get your footing if you're every fight you move to a different weight class, which is what he's been doing. But I don't know, man. He's he's like Brandon Moreno's Robin, basically. Like he was at Entrim Gym with Brandon Moreno, and then he came to Glory MMA. He's just kind of like the sidekick guy. Like he's decent, but he even said in the interview, he was in the middle of the Kyler Phillips fight, and he was like, "Man, I'm in this fight, and I realized like, fuck, there's levels to this game, man. I got no chance in this fight. Like this guy's so much better than me." I was like,
Exactly what we want to
can't
hear.
be thinking that like during a fight. I don't know, man. I think he's decent. He's decently well rounded, but I think he's got some limitations at 34 years old. I don't know how much he's going to be improving, but he did switch gyms, so he said he was like staying at Krause's house for a little bit. Like,
This
I mean, it
guy's
seemed
got
like he
bad
was.
news written all over it.
I know, man. It was so rough. I was like listening to that. I was like, oh man, this guy like he's just in the wrong place at the wrong time, man. Like he gets these terrible matchups, and then he joins Glory. Like
Yeah.
I felt bad for him. Like he's just like, yeah, I'll fight whenever. And I don't know. He's the type of guy that like he's kind of naive, and he's gonna realize after he gets cut from the UFC that he did everything wrong,
Yeah.
and that he could have, if he was smart, he could have done better because he can beat people. But I mean, I think he's lost like 3 of his last 4 fights. He lost to, like John Castaneda. Gets finished in all of his losses. He's been submitted 5 times. He's a fun fighter. I don't know if I can call him good, but he's fun, and he just he was just like never quite found his place where he needed to be.
But is this a
But
good matchup
he's
for
had
him
some
though?
tough. It's a good matchup, sort of. I mean, unless he gets taken down and submitted. I mean, he's going against a submission guy. He's been submitted a bunch, so like on paper it doesn't look great, but from a striking perspective, I think it's a good matchup. From an experience perspective, it's a good matchup. I'm just worried that if he gets taken down, he might get choked out. And he has been prone to gassing out. He did say that was like partially due to the weight cut, which I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. But I mean, he's been kind of gassing out for a while and getting finished in the 3rd round of like every fight, basically. So we'll see how it goes. It's not an ideal matchup, but the fact he's facing a newcomer, I mean, there's definitely holes that he can expose in Marshall's game if he can keep the fight standing.
Cool. Okay, sounds good. All right, let's move on to this next fight. Natan Levy and Valdez. Both guys just a couple fights under their belt. Good fighters, bad fighters, matchup for each.
Yeah, I think Valdez is a bad fighter. He's just like crazy brawler. Just tries to go nuts in the first round of every fight he's in. So I think that makes it a great matchup for Levy. I mean, Levy has a lot of holes in his game too, but I think Levy is like a decent fighter, still young in his career. I mean, he's 31, but he's only 7-1. I think he's a decent fighter and a great matchup. And I think for Valdez, I think he's a bad fighter, and it's a tough matchup because Levy's generally looking to get fights to the ground, and Valdez just wants to brawl with people.
Yeah, for those of you who have played in the past, remember that Valdez was the opponent when Frivola scored 140 points with 4 knockdowns and a round 1 finish. So goes to show what type of brawls he's looking to get into. All right, moving on down. Let's speed up the pace here. Emily Ducote making her second walk to the octagon. Thoughts?
I think she's a decent fighter. I think it's a tough matchup, though.
Fair enough. All right, and then Phil Rowe missed weight today. His 4th UFC fight.
Yeah, I think he's got a lot of holes in his game. I'm not ready to call him a good fighter. I mean, he's like a good striker, but he gets his legs beat up, gets taken down really easily. He's got decent submission defense. He trains with like Rodolfo Vieira and like Jacare Souza and stuff, but I'm not ready to call him a good fighter, but I think it's a good matchup for DFS because anyone that ever fights with Nico Price, it's a good matchup for DFS.
Fair enough. Very fair. All right. That concludes that segment. Let's move on to a fight that you have to target in DFS. Whoever wins is likely to score very well. A couple obvious ones on this card, Jake. Which one are you going to give the fans here and the viewers here on YouTube? And we'll save the good ones for the plug and MMADFS.com.
I mean, there was probably more options to choose from on this card than any card I've ever seen. But I'm gonna go with the Marshall Rojo fight just because I think if it stays standing, I think Rojo can find a first round knockout potentially, and if it hits the ground, I think Marshall can get a submission or score well in a decision. So it's kind of hard to see that fight failing to produce a high score.
Until we get the Phil Rowe is how it's affectionately called now, where you get controlled for one round and then you get a round two knockout to score 81 points and everyone fails, which hopefully we do not get tomorrow for either of those fights. So, Prize Picks, you see the promo code on screen here, allows you to parlay various props for all kinds of sports. A lot of soft lines you could take advantage of. You see the promotion there. Use promo code OCCUPY when you sign up. Link in the description. Get a 100% deposit match bonus. Deposit $100, get $100 free to play with. Jake, which line for UFC stood out to you the most this week on Prize Picks?
Yeah, I think there's a few, and they're all a little dicey, but I like Price over 50.5 significant strikes. I think we're going to see a brawl here. I think he could potentially clear that in like the first round or round and a half. So yeah, I'm gonna take the over there.
Okay, cool. Sounds good. All right, let's close it out with our stream parlay of the week. For all of Jake's best bets, he puts them out earlier in the week before the lines move, so make sure you get advantage of that. MMADFS.com puts the remainder of the best bets in the daily plug, which posts on Friday evenings at OccupyFantasy.com. All the links in the description below if you're into the betting, legal betting, sports market. So, Jake, I mean, it's an easy bet anytime he's on the card, especially with these odds. From my side of the stream parlay, I will go Bam Bam, Tai Tuivasa, round one or round two KO, plus 290 over at FanDuel, which to me really doesn't align with his money line because I feel like a vast majority of his win condition resides in those first two rounds.
Yeah, I agree. Those numbers should be, very, very similar. They're a little bit too wide. So yeah, I like that, man. I think he's got a good chance here to knock Sergey out, who has faced absolutely no adversity in his last four fights.
Gotcha.
So if you're going with a little bit of a longer shot, I'm gonna take a little safer one here. I'm gonna go Nicolau wins by submission or decision. That's negative 160, which I mean you compare that to his money line of negative 400. This guy hasn't knocked anybody out since 2014. So I mean, obviously he's gonna knock Schnell out now, but those not those numbers seem a little far apart for me. So I think that, if you want to get on the Nicolau train, I think that's the way to do it. And you can get it down from negative 400 to negative 160. And if we parlay those together, that's going to be plus 533.
Love to hear that. That's a very good bet, very solid bet. We're looking to get our third one here in the past few weeks, so make sure you guys hop on board. For more stream parlays, for more best bets, again, check out MMADFS.com. Jake's site, the sheet where he breaks down every fight from a betting and DFS perspective, the archive, which you can go back and look at historical slates and valuable information. OccupyFantasy.com, where we have the daily plug. It just condenses it all into one place for you. Best plays, low risk, high risk, lineup construction tips, best bets, prize picks plays, contest to target, you name it. Our model is up and running. Everyone in the industry basically has signed up for it at this point to see what the secret sauce is all about. Ranks every fighter, FanDuel, DraftKings with our projected ownership. And now, because late swap is so important over on DraftKings, our lineup builder, which does allow you to build up to 300 lineups using our optimal MMA lineup criteria, does have the late swap feature. So all you have to do once the fights start, switch on the late swap feature, upload your lineups, and you can start rebuilding after each fight. So it's very important in this day and age. So that'll do it for this video. We appreciate you staying to the end and listening. You can follow Jake on Twitter at DFS_MMA. You can follow me at Brian Jester FF. Also, if you made it this far, make sure you subscribe to the channel, get notified when we go live, upload these UFC videos. Give us a thumbs up if you appreciate the content. Any questions you have, you can always comment on the video, but however, the best way is to join our Discord server at OccupyFantasy.com/Discord. All that information is in the link in the description below. So for Jake, I'm Brian. Thanks for listening, and good luck at UFC Orlando.